Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and it's a big one today after frankly months of speculation. Red Bull and AlphaTauri have today confirmed that Nyck de Vries has been sacked from AlphaTauri with immediate effect, and this man, Daniel Ricciardo, will be returning to the sport in the AlphaTauri. Rumour also says that if he outperforms Yuki Tsunoda for the rest of the season, he will replace Perez in the primary Red Bull seat next season. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. It all began with the Red Bull Tyre test today. We knew Ricciardo was going to be in the RB19. There were rumours for some time that they were looking at Ricciardo putting him back in. Great driver on his day when he's on form, and honestly, when he's been in the Red Bull in general, we know that under braking, Ricciardo, that's where he was always strongest, and those McLarens were not great under braking, and that really hurt his style, and he was also driving against Lando Norris, one of the, at bare minimum, top 5 drivers on the grid, in my opinion, as it stands. Couple of difficult years, out of the sport, Red Bull bring him back in, great ambassador, and of course, phenomenal talent when he's on form. Is he washed? Well, Red Bull don't think so, and they want to prove it by putting him back in the AlphaTauri. This was the tyre test today. Pretty cool stuff in their Instagram. You guys see him walking in, and he clearly knew at this point that the events of today were going to unfold. He was even asked yesterday, how confident are you you'll be back on the grid? And he says, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's going to happen. And when he was asked about the AlphaTauri seat for next year, he said, you never know, you never know. Turned out he's going to get it rather sooner than that. This was the rumour that came out of Dutch media earlier today, just a few hours ago, that Nyck de Vries has been sacked with immediate effect. To be honest, I think many of us expected de Vries to go. He has not been impressive this year. He's not a Red Bull junior driver anyway, and there really is no reason to keep him around any longer. It's just incredible how ruthless Red Bull are with their drivers in the starting, in the main Red Bull team and also in AlphaTauri, because de Vries did a great drive last year in the Williams at Monza, replacing Alex Albon, put it P9, got a couple of points, outperformed Nicholas Latifi on the weekends. Not a particularly hard thing to do. And de Vries, he's a solid driver, but he's not particularly good. And he comes in to join AlphaTauri. Look, Formula E champion, he should be better than what he is, frankly. And I guess Red Bull thought, you know what? De Vries, a few years younger than, Sergio Perez, Dutch, just like Max Verstappen. Bring him into the AlphaTauri system. If it works out and he does very well, maybe he can be the longer term partner with Max, and that would make a lot of sense. It's become clear over the first few races, de Vries is not that guy, so they won't stick by him any longer. There's no reason for them to. They want to put someone else in the car. They want to see if Ricciardo's still got what it takes, and they want to free up that spot. That's what they're going to do immediately. De Vries has had a bit of a shocker, to be honest. Couple of crashes in Baku. This was one of them. This was the other one in the race that caused a safety car, I believe, at the time, cracking that front suspension open. And then even in recent races, some desperation, I think, has snuck in for de Vries because he's just been slow, and then he's had these tangles with Magnussen in Canada, and even more recently, of course, in Austria, where Magnussen went as far to say that, de Vries is straight up desperate to maintain his seat now, and, Magnussen will no longer have to worry about de Vries on the grid for the rest of the year because he's gone immediately. Tsunoda has devoured him, let's just be honest, so far this season. 8-2 so far in race results, and look, that AlphaTauri is probably the worst car on the grid right now. It was better at the start of the season relative to Williams, relative to McLaren, but both of those teams have made steps, and right now it's a battle between the AlphaTauri and the Alfa Romeo to be the worst car on the grid. Ricciardo's probably not going to have a great time in that car, but he will need to show that he can outperform Yuki Tsunoda, effectively is the plan. And if Tsunoda outperforms him, then they probably know Tsunoda's the real deal, because Tsunoda's had a tough time against Gasly the last couple of years, destroys de Vries, so Red Bull want to understand where is Yuki Tsunoda in his development. Could he be the longer term replacement to Perez and being alongside Max Verstappen in that car? So here's Ricciardo doing a few laps around Silverstone today, and you can see here down the main straight into Abbey, and well, no fans of course on the day, and apparently he was really rather quick. He was also pushing the limits as well. You guys can see this one coming through Brooklands and then through Luffield, and he actually gets on the power a little bit too aggressively and spins the car. They were running the tyres with no tyre blankets, so I think it's actually, it's good to find the limits there just to see how it'll go. But of course he was spotted having a bit of a spin, and these Red Bulls aren't completely immune to having spins. We saw Max Verstappen in Hungary last year, did it 360, still won the race, and maybe Perez is preparing for that, or he's preparing for just having a good time to celebrate him getting the seat. And apparently he was so good in the Red Bull today that his fastest lap time that he did would have been good enough for a front row start. So what did Verstappen do, a 26.8, and then Norris did like a 27.0, something like that. for P2. I think there's about 2.5 tenths there between Verstappen and Norris. So, yeah, the lap that Ricciardo did, his first drive, let's not forget, in this car and in this machinery, would have been good enough for P2, a front row start probably, within a couple of tenths of Verstappen. So that's very exciting. And, well, hopefully Ricciardo is actually back to form. I think it was Horner that said that in practice and in simulations, he's been really killing it. Unfortunately, the AlphaTauri is not a very good car, but they are giving Ricciardo the chance to prove himself again. De Vries sacked with immediate effect. Feel bad for De Vries, don't know what's next for him, whether he'll go back to Formula E, whether he'll go to endurance racing or something, but at the end of the day, he probably had a choice in some sense whether he was going to go to Williams or whether he was going to go to AlphaTauri. Maybe in hindsight, Williams would have been the wiser one, but at the end of the day, I can't blame him going for the AlphaTauri option if there were both options on the table because, you know, if he'd performed, he could well have been in the Red Bull seat in the future and partnering Max Verstappen as teammates and friends and countrymen, but he's just not good enough, is how it is. And Eric Van Haren here mentions in the article that if Ricciardo does well in the Red Bull, he will be heavily favoured to replace Perez. And I think that's what this is about in part. Like, they could have given De Vries a couple more races, but they're not just to get rid of De Vries and bring Ricciardo in and see what Ricciardo can do, but mainly, I think, to put pressure on Perez. He's been underperforming, and they want Perez to know you've got to look behind you, not in front. Perez, Checo, don't look at Max, don't worry about that. Get consistent performances on the board and watch your own back here because Ricciardo's coming for you. I think that's a large part of why they've done this, and very shortly afterwards it was officially confirmed by Formula 1. Look at this graphic, I mean it's been blowing up all over socials. Daniel Ricciardo replaces Nyck de Vries. Back in the sport, also confirmed here on the AlphaTauri website, Daniel Ricciardo welcomed back to Scuderia AlphaTauri on loan officially from Red Bull Racing, and you know, these are the comments that were being made here by, well, Franz Tost, and also Daniel Ricciardo stoked to be back on track with the Red Bull family, and even Red Bull themselves confirmed this. When the news drops that you'll be back on the F1 grid at the very next race, like, I thought if Ricciardo was going to come back in the middle of the season, it would be for Zandvoort, right, after the summer break. But no, with immediate effect, he'll be there in Hungary driving the car. And that is what Eric Van Haren says, that Perez's performances didn't help De Vries because they know that De Vries is not really what Red Bull care about. They care about the main team and who's going to partner Max for the next several years. And Perez hasn't been performing. He's been okay in the races, but, you know, any driver can make up places in that Red Bull during the race, let's be honest. So him getting knocked out before Q3 for the last 5 races has not impressed, and Ricciardo wants to prove that he can still be in Red Bull quality. To do that, he's going to have to outperform Yuki Tsunoda, who's done a good job, absolutely, and it's not a great car. Like, it's not going to suit Ricciardo's. Ricciardo would love to have a car like the Red Bull to prove himself in, but he's going to have to do it in the AlphaTauri. Tsunoda's been there for some time, and if Tsunoda wipes the floor with Ricciardo, then it shows probably Ricciardo hasn't got what it takes anymore, and maybe Yuki's the guy to step up to Red Bull in the future. I don't think Yuki is quite ready yet to be Max's partner in the Red Bull. I would say that he needs at least one more year. Just, you know, he's still a little bit young and raw in some sense, you know, some of the radio stuff. So I think Red Bull might think about that. But yeah, I agree with Will Buxton's perspective here that they're rushing him back early to put pressure on Checo, is the way I see this. But then it also makes me wonder what's next for the AlphaTauri seat in general, because next season, let's say that Perez gets fired next year. I think it's probably just over 50% that he stays, because Red Bull, they're winning the championships anyway. Verstappen even mentioned in a comment the other day, he was like, well, I can win the constructors on my own, which he actually is, I'm pretty sure at the moment. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that he is. And even if it was just him and not even Perez involved. So, you know, they can get away with Perez having poor performances this year, but ideally they don't want that to be the case. If Perez gets fired, as I think that he might well, it almost feels kind of 50-50 to me right now, although many people would say that he should stay around, and maybe he will, but I still think they're eyeing up the possibility of replacing Perez as it stands, and you couldn't blame them on recent performances. Then it's like, well, what do you do with AlphaTauri? If, let's say, Ricciardo was to step up to next year's Red Bull, Perez wouldn't be dropping down to AlphaTauri, he'd be going elsewhere to another team or to another, you know, sports category entirely, and then it's like, who do they bring in next? Because Liam Lawson has been a big name that's been going around. Helmut Marko sent him off to Super Formula in Japan, and is quite impressive. He's quite an impressive driver. I don't know if he's necessarily turned heads the way that he might have hoped for. Also, a Yuma Iwasa from Formula 2 has been quite impressive. And this was the comment from Marco back in May where he said, yeah, Nick's got the yellow card but not the red one, and the red one has now been dished out emphatically. Also, there was this, that Helmut Marko is also interested in Alex Palou, Spanish driver currently in IndyCar, dominating the championship over there, it's got to be said, in stunning fashion, really. Like, the IndyCar championship has so many high-quality drivers and is so competitive that for Palou to be doing what he's doing in that series is pretty unprecedented, actually. He's a bit more of a boring driver than a guy like Pato O'Ward, in the sense that, you know, he's maybe not so flamboyant and, you know, enjoyable to watch at times, but he's very consistent. And I'd love to see Palou have a go in a Formula 1 car. I'm not sure if I want it to be the AlphaTauri, to be honest, because it's not a very good car. But still, Helmut Marko's also expressed interest in Palou, and he also expressed interest even today in Lando Norris. This is not a surprise. We know that they went after Norris before, and I'm sure that many F1 fans would love to see a world in which post-2025, 2026 or something, Norris and Verstappen were in the Red Bull, because McLaren have improved, for sure, but I can't see them winning a championship during, like, the next several years. Mainly because even from 2026, they're still going to be a Mercedes customer team. They're still relying on engines from Mercedes, and eventually Mercedes will figure their things out, you would think, and will start to outclass McLaren again on a consistent level. So I just can't see them winning a championship there. So I think Norris has got to choose at some point to go somewhere else. Maybe that's Mercedes when Hamilton retires. Maybe it's Red Bull. And as Helmut Marko says, he'd be the ideal guy. He's by far the best of the younger drivers. And I agree with this, right? I think that in the right machinery, Hamilton and Alonso could put up a fight against Max. But of the younger guys, you know, Charles, George, Lando, I think Lando's the best right now and probably the most promising, and also good friends with Max. Now, I don't know if Lando wants to do that theoretically. Do you want to join Max's team in Red Bull when everything is set up for his success? And for good reason, right? Good teams create dynasties by building around their number one driver. So it's a question as to whether Lando wants that, but clearly there's some indecision at Red Bull as to exactly what they're doing, especially in that second seat in AlphaTauri, and pretty much he has a few races, I think 12 races from now to the end of the season, Daniel Ricciardo, to prove that he's better than Yuki Tsunoda. He's still got what it takes. The McLaren era doesn't define him as a driver, and if he does well enough, he's going to be probably in the Red Bull next season, if not almost certainly the year after that, if he stays at a high level. Very exciting to see the Honey Badger back in the sport. Very much intrigued to hear your perspective in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.